Welcome to this episode of Circle Back. I'm your host, Sam Davidson. We are here at Nashville Entrepreneur Center in the Chase studio with today's guest, Don and Tracy Hardin of the Don Hardin Group. These are some of our newest announced Hall of Fame members. We'll be inducting them this October into the Entrepreneurs Hall of Fame. We're excited today to have a conversation about entrepreneurship, about family, about success, about challenges, but ultimately also about Nashville. Thanks for joining us today. Let's jump right into it. Don, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Hardin with Don Hardin Group. I'm a native Nashvillian. I've been doing construction management for more than 26 years now.
And Tracy, introduce yourself.
My name is Tracy Hardin. I am the COO of Don Hardin Group. I'm a native of Knoxville, Tennessee, and I've been part of this construction journey for about 23 years.
Fantastic. We're going to get into that, how you all met each other, how this came to be, and everything. But the first question I always like to ask folks, and either of you can go first, but who was the first entrepreneur you ever remember knowing, meeting from when you were, maybe happened at a young age or maybe later in life?
My first was my father.
Okay.
My father was actually a professor and department head at the University of Tennessee. He came to the University of Tennessee in 1966 as their first black tenured professor.
Wow.
That was his job, but he had other jobs. He did real estate, and when I was in middle school, he and some friends opened a convenience store and barbecue because he did the best barbecue in town.
Excellent.
And he kept that store through college, and he'll tell you, I worked at the university, but this store paid for you to go to college. So he was my first example of an entrepreneur.
And did you, growing up in that house, did you think, that's what I want to do one day? I want to start something?
Actually, the opposite.
Okay.
I wanted a 9 to 5. I'd see him downstairs back in the day doing payroll on a yellow, tablet, and just owning a convenience store. It was hard to find people that you could trust. And so I saw him and my mother, even my mother at some points, would be closing the store at 11 o'clock. And I wanted absolutely nothing to do with that. So, yeah, I saw it, but initially I did not want to be an entrepreneur.
Not inspirational.
No.
What about you, Don?
I had to think about that for a minute, but I realized the first entrepreneur that I met was a couple that ran a little market. Over the hill, I grew up in a neighborhood called Trinity Hills here in Nashville. And over the hill was a market that my little small store that my mother sent us to every now and then. It was a convenience store, but it didn't have the typical gas station that you have. And Mr. Jimmy and Miss Kitty ran that store, and I still see her face because she reminded me of, when I thought about Miss Kitty, you think about Gunsmoke, right? And she was like a black woman with red hair and a big mole like the lady Miss Kitty on Gunsmoke. And as I got older, it turned out to be a good friend of mine. His name is Patrick Johnson. That's his aunt and uncle. And so I'm like, wow. So that was my first experience.
Is that store still there?
Patrick has turned that into a little apartment. He has somebody, he's renting it out as an apartment. So
excellent.
Yeah.
And that's something we'll get into, sort of how you both have seen Nashville change. But take us from there, from where you grew up here in Nashville, what that was like growing up, what you thought you might be doing for a living when you were younger. Just walk us through some of those early years up through high school, let's say.
Okay. Interestingly enough, we first lived in, before I was 8 years old, we lived on Mallory Street in South Nashville. It was just a stone's throw from the Speedway, Nashville Speedway. And my first school was Johnson Elementary, where I went to kindergarten, and then I went to Fall Hamilton, which is really right there right there on Wedgewood and near the stadium, soccer stadium. And then my mom bought a house in Trinity Hills when we moved there when I was 8 years old. It was a brand new house. It was kind of an affordable neighborhood. But it felt fun, a lot of love there. Grew up with 3 other brothers. It was all boys, and had a great experience. Football in the street, that kind of thing, basketball, a lot of friends in the neighborhood. And as I matriculated through Maplewood, one of my professors thought I had a knack for math, and I loved art. And I still love art, but my thing is to get all the math out of the way by my senior year, and I can just take art. And every day I passed by this certain teacher's class, he would say, Donald, that was the name, my full name. Donald, you need to get back in math. And I was like, I tried to avoid that. Even I would go, before I went to by his class, changing classes, I would go up and around the stairs to avoid his door. Finally, he caught me vulnerable one day and said, you should change your art class and get in my math class. That math class, we toured TSU's engineering program. And I became interested in engineering, and I applied for the engineering school and got in. Otherwise, if it wasn't for that math teacher, I don't know what I'd be doing. So.
Wow. That's a great story. Tracy, what about you? Sort of similar time period. You mentioned obviously growing up and being in an entrepreneurial household. But what about school for you? What were you interested in? Where did you think you would study, or what did you study?
I thought I was going to be a doctor, so I started pre-med, and freshman year, first semester, bio 14, they took us to the morgue, and I decided I did not want to be a doctor because you would have to work with bodies. So I changed to political science and ended up getting my bachelor's and master's in public administration. So my background is really nonprofit management, and that's what I did. Well, at least tried to do, is we moved from place to place, because when we got married, we moved from place to place. But we got back to Nashville, settled again back into public administration, working with a local nonprofit, Nashville Read, which closed. And about the time it closed was when we started Don Hardin Group. We had started about a year before, and Don says, I need you to come work with me. And I said, this is not what I do. And the next year, I came full-time to Don Hardin Group.
How did you all meet?
We met at, she laughs
I know she laughed at that.
She laughs every
we're gonna
time
get to
I
her
tell
take
the
on
story.
it. Right, okay.
I'm going to try not to lie because
Don't lie today.
we're in front of the world. So we met. My senior, I had one more year left in college. I was working at UPS, and I had lived out of my mom's house for a while with two other roommates. We partied and had fun, and then we ran out of money, and we all had to move back to our house, right, our prospective houses. And I thought I could stay out as late as I wanted to, like I did when I was living on my own. And the last time my mother locked the door on us, and I had to sleep in my car, I decided I better take it up on my roommate up on his shaggy apartment to move into, right? So it's like, look. And so that particular weekend that I moved into my roommate's shaggy apartment, I was working at UPS, and we had a celebration. We had a luncheon at Houston's. It was the original Houston's, and me and a few other guys, we would get up and leave at individually, a few at a time. And I saw this young lady. She had on the customary. I can remember the blue khaki, kind of the blue pants and the yellow shirt, and her hair was pulled back kind of in a bun, and I said I need to meet her. But on my way past the hostess desk, she was a hostess there. I said, I'm going to say something to her. I'm not going to say something to her. It's almost like the whole flower petal thing.
Yeah.
And so by the time I got to the hostess stand, I was out of luck. I was forced to introduce myself. So I introduced myself to her and to Tracy, and I asked her that if I could have her number. She threw it at me. She was excited to give me her number.
A lie.
No.
She was like here, I've been waiting on you all my life.
The fable.
So
May 13th.
May 13th, 1989, and kind of a long story short, I called, instead of playing, you can't go out on the Saturday the same day you call, right? You gotta wait a couple of days. Maybe I'll wait till Monday. I didn't do that. I called her the same day, and we went out the same night, and we've been going out ever since.
Any other? That's all true.
This is true.
Okay,
This
that
is
part's
true. That
So
part is true.
1989. You don't start the company until when?
In 2000.
Okay, so walk us through that decade between when you meet.
I'll let you walk.
So Don had one more year left in college.
Okay, what about you? You were done.
I finished actually 5 days before we met.
Okay, there you
Yeah.
go. So you met a graduate. You met a college
Yes.
graduate.
Yeah,
A
I
new
did.
college
I did.
graduate.
Yeah.
I met a grown woman.
That's right.
But he had 1 year left. I was working here in Nashville, but his first job was with a company called Floor Daniel, which at the time was the largest engineering construction company in the country. And they moved him to Oswego, New York. We were engaged, and I ended up moving to Oswego, and we got married in Syracuse. And
she caught a Greyhound bus up there to see a player.
And that's the last time I got on a Greyhound bus. I have not been on a bus since to go to Syracuse. So that assignment lasted for maybe a year. And from there, we went to Bowling Green, Kentucky. So he was working on an aluminum project in Russellville, Kentucky, and we lived in Bowling Green. That's when I went back to school and got my master's.
From Western Kentucky.
From Western Kentucky. From Bowling Green, we went to Greenville, South Carolina, which is a home office for his company, and we were there for a year. Then we moved to Chicago, Illinois. He had another assignment in Chicago. Our son was born in Chicago. From there, we went to Birmingham, Alabama, and Don was on the project where they built the Mercedes-Benz plant in Vance. So from Birmingham, we went to Reading, Pennsylvania, another aluminum project. From Reading, Pennsylvania, we went back to Greenville, and we were living in a residence inn in Greenville. And he came one day and said that they were thinking about sending us to Charleston for just a few months, not even a year. And
even though we love Charleston, but we just didn't want to.
But by that time, our son was almost 2, and moving with a child like that is really difficult. So a friend talked to him about coming to Albuquerque, and he went out to try out for the position, to see if it was going to be a good fit for a couple of weeks, and we ended up moving to Albuquerque. And I loved Albuquerque. We were there for 3 years, and in 1999, he got a call that said, Don, one of his friends, Don, we're building a church in Nashville, and we really need your help. Can you come out and look at it? And so Don came out. It was Mount Zion, the Old Hickory Boulevard project. And he came out and looked at it and said, I want to move back to Nashville. And so we moved back. I came back kicking and screaming, but we moved back to Nashville, and we've been here ever since.
And this is a lot of moves.
Right.
At any point were you like, one day I'm going to do my own thing? Or were you just, hey, next job, next opportunity?
It was I had this idea. Again, I think looking back, Sam, I wasn't really an exposed person. My mom, she didn't force us to go to college. She wasn't one of those like you going to college or else, and I think we obviously we had a different experience with our own son, that you going to college or I don't know what else you're going to do. But so I was very impressionable. I think I was, even when Mr. Knight, the math teacher, said, you ought to change, I was impressionable. So it was like, for a good way. I guess I could discern whether that seems like a bad idea or not. But making all these moves, it seemed it was what the company did. Yeah. And when I first started working, I remember going to Oswego thinking, hey, this is great. I got a job out of college, and I'm going to work for 30 years and get a watch and retire. I thought that was what. Yeah. And then I was disenchanted when I heard. You have to understand, Fluor is a big design and construction company. They had the engineering would come out of Greenville, and wherever they were doing projects, that's where the drawings would go. And I can remember hearing one of the project managers pretty much cursing out the engineer, like, dumb engineer. This. And I thought, my naive self, like, they work together. Why are they fussing like that? And then it started to unravel that maybe being around a company like this for 30 years is not that good of a, if it works out. But I wasn't bucking that. And then coming back home, it was like, okay, now what do you do next? It was really more of a, what do you do next? The idea of starting some kind of business started to surface when I was moving back to Nashville. It's like, okay, so how do under what auspices would I help Mount Zion get their project built? And other partners were saying, hey, we can start a business doing that. But those other partners didn't really understand construction, how to market construction. They really weren't pushing. It was almost like, I think they treated it kind of like, hey, we're an investor in some business, and you got to go do it. Like, okay, well, where's the other work coming from?
Yeah.
So in construction, it's not quite like you make gadgets and you're gonna sell 50 loaves of bread every hour, and we're gonna put some money in. No, it's quite different. So I ended up saying, hey, I'm gonna go at it on my own.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of an organic kind of way of figuring it out.
And so the sales pitch, if you want to call it that, to get you back, even if you came back kicking and screaming, other than you'd like to stay married to him, was there anything about Nashville at that time? Because that time, that kind of turn of the millennium in Nashville, some things are happening, but not everything.
Yeah, let me say that a little bit, because she mentioned that like it was no consequences involved at all.
Sure.
Right? So it was a lot of no's, and I don't know, because you have to understand, when we moved to Albuquerque, beautiful scene. We were, I was managing, I had got promoted to manage 25 engineers under me, but more importantly, she got to build a house, right? So we went through the process of building the house and watching our son grow up, and a little bit, and even I remember him getting lost down. It was a neighborhood that you like, where is Trey? He's out of the house and he's down the street playing with the kids, and he's like 3 years old, right? So it was that kind of feel. Yeah. So for us to move back, it was like me saying, look, two things. You can come back to Albuquerque whenever you want to. She goes back once or twice a year. And secondly, we will build another house. So it wasn't like it was some promises made in order for her to feel comfortable moving
But it
back.
was a little bit more than that, because another thing that happened was we were moving on a yearly basis. It was impossible for me to find work.
Yeah.
Luckily, with the nonprofit background, I was able to volunteer, but those were in the days where when you go in, they hand you an application and they say, list your last 5 addresses and dates. So I literally had 5 addresses of less than a year, and it was impossible for me to get work. And finally in Albuquerque, I settled into a job that was fit for my background, and around the time that we left, there was an opportunity for me to advance. So I think I was more kicking and screaming because that was my first opportunity to really get in the workforce like I wanted to be in the workforce and to do what I loved. So that was part of it.
And was part of the opportunity then, to make sure I understand this right, moving back to Nashville, was that tied with starting a firm? Or would you move back and then, like you mentioned, you started talking to people and then you started the firm?
Yes.
Okay.
It was more or less like move back and build this structure.
Okay.
And I think when I think back, most people probably wouldn't do that without a more of a plan. But I think the thing about working for Fluor in those big construction companies, and Tracy will tell you too, you get used to moving. Unfortunately, a year and a half. It was after a year and a half, you thought, okay, it's time to go somewhere. You almost get bored because you feel like it's time to move. And I feel like, coming back. Sure, you're thinking what's next, but I probably thought, hey, it's no big deal. I can find more work because that's what we've always done. But to the level of being an entrepreneur, and this long, it definitely wasn't the plan. So, I tell people all the time, I've never been one of those that says, hey, I want to start my own business one day. It was really never that, honestly.
And when he shares this with you, that he's going to start the Don Hardin Group, is there part of you that says, nope, I saw this, I grew up in this, I don't, that's not the life you wanted, was to be an entrepreneur because you saw how your parents.
No.
Okay.
No.
At that point, you were like, well.
At that point, yeah, at that point. But it was always, okay, I've got my day job over here.
That's right.
And, you start this, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. So initially, I did not see myself as a part of it.
And so what's the first project you work on as the Don Hardin Group once this
exists?
It was
Nissan North America, and in Canton, Mississippi. Like most people, they kind of get into their trade profession. Like I became active in Project Management Institute. Before I left Albuquerque, we did work for Intel out there. And before I left Intel work, the whole environment was a lot of project managers would get involved in this national organization called Project Management Institute that administers PMP exams. People have a P on if you're an engineer, or PMP if you're a project manager. And so it was the thing, but there was a lot of networking going on. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I got to figure out who to network with. Went to a few PMI lunches, befriended a guy. It's another long story. Hardy Seaborn. Hardy Seaborn was one of the engineers for Barge Wagon Summer in Canton, which now is a bar solution. So all the other engineers kind of faded out or whatnot. And we went to lunch one day, and he said, Don, what is it that you do? And I started to tell him, and he said, send me your resume. He saw on my resume that had automotive experience on the Mercedes-Benz plant. He said, Don, we got a project in Canton, so Nissan had one other larger firm design the building, but I think they became disenchanted with their work in some of the internal components. They had barge design. And so barge, and part of their contract was to have somebody to go on site and oversee the electrical, mechanical, and structural. And my background was structural. So the first thing I did for Hardy was I laid out the schedule for their design process. So he said, okay, great. That was the first contract. And then he said, Don, would you be willing to go on site? And I thought, yeah, sure. You don't say no, but I'm thinking, oh, man, I'm going to, but it wasn't going to be a move. It was going to be me going back and forth, right? So for 10 months, I was on the Canton site in Canton, Mississippi, managing that part of the design. So,
and as this starts to grow a little bit, are you thinking, all right, he might have something. This might be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
And then how long did it take before you make her a job offer?
That was interesting. Like most spouses, you come home, and you throw your book, your jacket on the table. You thought, well, what a crummy day or whatever. And I heard enough of that from her coming from a couple of places, nonprofit, and oftentimes they're waiting on more funding to come in to guarantee. I think it was Catholic Charities or something.
No, it was Nashville Reed, but they actually closed their doors.
Yeah, but it was another entity that helped fund Nashville
Catholic,
Reed.
Yeah.
Catholic Charities funded them. And so I can remember her being frustrated, and I'm at this point.
But we always got our funding.
Well, you were frustrated.
Yeah.
And it was always I'm always coming home and trying to write the proposals, submit the proposals, do the work, do the invoice, and I'm like pulling my hair out.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to her frustrated. I'm like, why don't you come and help me? But I can tell that she like, no, I want to be in my profession. It was that kind of pullback. Like, no, I want to practice what I got a degree in. I'm like, okay, but I could really use your help. So when she finally said, why don't I help you? It was like, here you go. You take this. This is what I do with this. This is what I do with that. And she's just taking it to a whole new level. The whole accounting, QuickBooks, everything we do, 401k, dealing with the CPA and all the employee stuff. So, she's just taking that and ran with it.
And did you think it would be as big a job as it is?
No, probably not. And it changes as you grow.
Right.
Initially, it's just the two of us, so you don't need an employee handbook.
Yeah, right.
You don't need to follow that. But some of the things that we did that may have seemed extreme from the beginning, I was just like, one, we are not going to get in trouble with the IRS. And I know he thought that I was crazy, but from day one, we had a payroll service. I was not going to be my father with that notebook, literally adding and deducting and filing the forms. I was like, I am not going to be that person because we are going to grow. And I just, we can scale. So,
And how long was it before you do start to hire people, or was there a turning point, a
Yeah.
project, or a certain amount of time where you're like, okay,
I'd
we
say-
can get bigger than the two of us?
Right. I'd say it was a couple of levels of that. The first time, again, I think I was always networking. Network with Vanderbilt University, and it was one of those things where we were going to build the National Museum of African American Music. It was called MAMAC at the time, and we had gotten a contract with Vanderbilt, and HCA was like I'm going to be the one that does this. Like, wow, you stir the pot and hope something comes through when they all might come through, and then you start to figure out, okay, we need to figure out how to get some help, and then but as quick as they come on the table, they get put on hold or that kind of thing. So I can remember the first when we really started having hire was the HCA people.
Yeah.
And we did. I networked again with one of the people there who was a manager. He was one of their diversity managers. I was sitting in his office one day. His boss comes in. I know of his boss. I had done research on who managed their construction, and a guy named Tom Gormley. He's still probably out there helping people. But Tom came in his office one day asking him to do something. I'm sitting there, and I said, "Hey, Mr. Gormley, I know that you're responsible for HCA's work, and we do this and did da da da." And I gave him a card. He looked at my card and said, "Okay, I'll see if we have anything." And I thought, it's probably not going to go anywhere. Shortly after, they were asking me to come back and meet with another guy who was an attorney, but his job was to all the hospitals that HCA would acquire didn't comply with ADA. So they had a program to retrofit all these old hospitals they would buy around the country to retrofit them with ADA, and I was helping out with that project. And the attorney who was my client said, "This is going great." After a year or so, he said, "This is great. But we have more projects to get done." So he wrote on the whiteboard. We're in a conference room. He writes on the whiteboard the plan to do all these different hospitals in different cities over 10 years or so. He's like, "How do you see helping out?" I said, "Have you ever heard of staff augmentation?" He's like, "What's that?" And because that's what I did at Intel, and I explained to him. He said, "Let's do that," and we started hiring people.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how is there when did you start setting growth goals, opportunity goals, revenue goals? How have you looked at that with work like this that I've not been in this industry? Seems volatile, can be at the whims of where maybe we're there now in terms of interest rates, tariffs, material costs. When you have things like the 2008 downturn, I mean, at what point do you start to dream, but maybe not enough, or maybe not too much?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time.
All the
It's a
time.
new dream.
Yeah, every day.
All the time. Yeah. Even now we're going through the assessing what the next 5 to 10 years looks like, because it's ever changing. We got fortunate during the downturn in the economy late 2000s. Because we had some major projects going on at that time. So we weathered that a lot better than a lot of people did. And we seem to always have a backlog of work, but we seem to always, over the last few years, have an issue of when does it get started, because the start date is off a lot of the time. But we generally have always kept a backload of projects. So,
the conversations we probably have had the most over the time is we would do, and I like to think you kind of go away in quiet space and study what you have. You study like, I think you even mentioned on the top of the show the challenges, the issues. You start to look at the past projects and, what was a terrible project, what was struggling to pay or whatever, and what was okay, and why, and we need to do more of that. So we would try to create kind of not really scrap your business plan, but take the marketing side of your business plan to say, okay, what do we need to market more of, right, to try to look ahead. And we would always look at the projects that we need to do more of that. The profit margins are really good, and the clients seem to understand why we need it, and it makes sense to go after more of that. But that's the best laid plans are what they are.
Sure.
We would come back from the mountains, and the phone would ring about other stuff.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, forget about what we just said.
Right.
The phone is ringing
The
for us
phone
to
is
do
ringing
this,
and
right?
and the contract's on the table.
And you
move
don't say, you're less likely to say no. We don't say no to a lot of stuff. I think, again, we've just been fortunate. We've been blessed to be able to have opportunity and provide other opportunities, and that growth it gets us give us a chance for the other younger folks to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been the most rewarding thing, because we're getting up there in age now, so we're trying to see the beach.
Yeah.
But we can't get there yet.
Yeah, she just said 5-10 years. You guys, we got plans we're making.
Okay, yeah.
What?
I don't know.
Well, and a lot of folks we have on the podcast here, they have sold a business, or they've exited, or they've had some opportunity. Is that part of the discussions of getting to the beach? I mean, this is a family business still.
Yeah.
You all still own all of it?
Yes. But I think that, I promise you, probably get, Sam, you may understand, I'll probably get 3 or 4 emails or calls a day saying, hey, have you thought about selling? Hey,
Sure.
have you thought about what we like the idea of, especially as an African-American business, is leaving something that stays around.
Mm-hmm.
So I think starting a business, that's kind of the easy part. Passing it on, you don't really get to hear many others who've done that. I think my hat's off to LaDonna Boyd, who's RH Boyd, still around. It's like you can almost count on one hand how many black businesses still around, and so not just our son, but there are others in our company that we're grooming to. If our son wants to be a part of, when we raised our son, we never said you're going to do this or else. We wanted, if he wanted to catch frogs for a living, as long as he can, sustain himself, have at it. Some kind of way he's found his way to become very interested in what we do and taking it on. But they all 2 or 3 or 4 understand that we're trying to find a way to sell shares to them and let them be. Kind of take it to whatever next level we'll help them out all the way. But we want to be able to own less percentage in another year or 2.
Okay.
So that's our plan.
Is there anything looking back that you've learned, either of you, about a family business, about husband and wife running the company together? However you learn the lessons, that a lot of people listening to this and a lot of people who go through our programs are on the very front side of that, and they do intentionally want to work with their family. These are people they love. These are people that have common goals, and so any sort of those rules, whether it's always have a payroll service or dinner time, we don't work, we don't talk about work. I've heard lots of different rules on that. Is there anything you all try to keep in mind, or anything you would recommend anybody? Again, what you would tell yourselves 20 years ago to make the company work, to make a family work, to make a marriage work.
One thing that helps in this is that even though we're a construction company, I don't have a construction background. So my responsibilities within the company are different than his responsibilities in the company. So there's a little bit of overlap, but he's not doing payroll. No one's getting paid if he's doing payroll.
This is true.
So there's a separation. And then the other thing that has played a big part is consistency over the 20 plus years. And a part of that consistency is relationships, not just between us, but with the people that we work with. We've had the same accountant the whole time we've been in business.
Oh, excellent.
We've had the same insurance agent the whole time that we've been in business. And that relationship is we get what we need
And the
at
same
the
attorney.
highest level.
Same attorney.
And the same attorney. So those relationships have been good, and that just makes it easier for us to work together.
What, looking back, we'll start to wrap up here, a couple questions just about Nashville and a little bit more advice. Looking back, is there any project or opportunity you're more proud of, got more excited about, especially in Nashville? We have a lot of local listeners, and rapid growth. You can sort of look out from this window a little bit, see some of the things you all have built. But is there anything that you've gotten to work on in any capacity that you're really glad you got to do that one?
You
for
know,
what it means to you or to the city.
You know, that question comes up a lot, and I'm starting to feel differently. I would say that the National Museum of African American Music probably was my favorite one because one reason, not because it's cultural, but because the owner said the mayor and the owner said, hey, you know, we're going to break ground, we cut the ribbon, you guys can go. They said, Don, now go build a museum. And it was like when somebody puts that responsibility on you. So when you work on these larger projects, you're always fighting to get heard, or we always, and I call it the little brother. I've run out of analogies and stories, but I'll just tell this one. When I worked on the Music City Center project, it was a struggle to work with too big, a large company, that was national, then a local company, and then us as a small company. And we had an org chart where everybody's got a place. You have positions on the org chart, and you're supposed to get a certain fee and all. But it was always a struggle. It's like, look, no, I'm supposed to have that box. That box is mine, and and I promised this female that she was going to have this job. And I got to tell her she don't have a job. That's a real story. But the way I described them to them, I sat both of them down in the conference room one day, and I said, "You ever watch Leave It to Beaver?" They were like, "Yeah, we watched Leave It to Beaver." I'm like, "You're Eddie Haskell, and you're Wally, and I'm the Beaver. Now you just told the city ward that, hey, that we're gonna take care of Beaver. We're gonna he's gonna be good. And then as soon as he leaves, now you treat me like a brother, and you tell me to get in the car and just get in the car and ride. We'll get you some ice cream if you shut up, that kind of thing." And they belly laugh like ha ha ha. I'm serious, So it's been those kind of real projects that, as a small business, you're always fighting to make sure you're. And it's not just for Don; it's for the folks in the room who are looking for opportunity. So for the museum to say, Don, we want you to go build this museum, and with that opportunity, we made sure the equity was spread across every part of the product, from the designer, from the exhibit designer, from the fabricators to the electrician, to everybody who wanted to really have a fair shake, who are professional and good at what they do, to be able to all pull it together and everybody go and visit that place. That's why it's special.
That's excellent. What about you?
That's probably
That's it.
the one that's most special. Another one that's special to me is probably Music City Center as well, because managing that for Harmony, from the spreadsheets and everything and the personnel and that was quite the undertaking, and to go through that and then to turn around, and I currently serve on the board, so in another capacity there to serve in what we built is special.
It's clearly a full circle, a circle back moment, which is obviously the title of this podcast. So last question I have for you all. Advice out there on any part of starting a business. We obviously talked about the family component, but for folks listening who are new on their entrepreneurial journey, is there anything that you like to tell folks, whether you officially mentor them or not, but just, hey, keep this thing in mind as you're doing this?
I'd say stick with what you set out to do. Stay with your plan. It's funny. I got a title that I haven't told Tracy about this, but I have this other hustle that I've been trying to start on the art side, and that is an entity called Campaign Do Work that will make high visibility clothes for more interesting. But we have like a theme, and the theme that I have now is no backup plan. So if you're going to start a business, don't have a backup plan. Just create a plan and don't have a backup.
What about you?
I like the no backup, because when I came into the business, I went through those periods like, can I go back to my day job? But you push through it. You just have to push through it. and it will all work out in the it will all work out in the end. I mean, we pushed through COVID. COVID for me was a shining point for us because when other people were letting people off, we were just like, no, we're not. We're not doing it. We don't care if you're not working. You're still going to continue to get your paycheck. That just means last year's profit's gone, but you're going to keep getting your paychecks. And I went through periods, and Don will tell you, I went through periods where I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this. There are periods when you start out that are hard. We had times when we didn't get paid, but our employees always got paid. They always got paid. So there are going to be hard times. I don't know any entrepreneur that does not go through hard times. There will be hard times, but you just have to stay the course.
Thank you all for sharing your story today. Thank you for the candor, the advice, the ups and downs. Don and Tracy, congrats on joining our Hall of Fame. We're excited to celebrate you this year.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Circle Back, where my guests were Don and Tracy Hardin of the Don Hardin Group and two of our newest inductees into the Nashville Entrepreneurs Hall of Fame. As always, Circle Back is brought to you through the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family and in partnership with the Nashville Post. Please be sure to listen, review, and share wherever you enjoy podcasts. We'll see you next time.